Okie dokie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you all will be able to see it. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. This is the Department of Development virtual community meeting on the proposed updates to the residential tax abatement policy. We had several meetings in the fall and one in January, really looking at where we were for an update standpoint from the policy that was put in place in 2018. We're going to walk through the presentation this evening, kind of give some of that background. I know there are several of you who are joining us this evening that probably heard this several times, but this is an opportunity for anyone that hasn't heard it to go ahead and understand kind of the process we went through to make our proposed updates to the policy. With me tonight, I also have several folks from our housing division, Jeremy Druitt, Michelle Castrogiovanni, and Rita Parise. I will walk through the PowerPoint and then I'm going to turn it back over to Miss Reed, Hannah Reed from our development department. And she will be moderating any questions or discussion that we have after the presentation. And I may call on some of our folks from the housing division to answer some of the questions and participate in the discussion as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and just walking through where we are now that it is June of 2022 on the residential tax abatement program. And what we want to start with, I apologize. I probably should have started with this. I'm Erin Brasser. I'm the Assistant Director for Housing Strategies for the City of Columbus here in the Department of Development. I've been in this position. It was a newly created position to really think strategically about the ways in which the City of Columbus is engaged in our housing in the community and making sure that we are delivering what we need to support our residents and especially to support our growing population. So I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly outside the CRA about the City of Columbus and where we are on an overall housing strategy. And so I want to kind of start with the kind of high level part of what we're working on broadly at the City of Columbus. So the CRA policy is a component of the strategy and certainly a tool that we'll talk about how it fits into the strategy. But overall, we really need to get to a place where we are building the housing infrastructure we need to support our growing city. And that is a really important part of the strategy. And it really is that big headline. There is no greater threat to our affordability than the scarcity of housing that we are facing in our community. As we grow in population with our tremendous efforts on economic development by both the City of Columbus and our suburban jurisdiction partners, we are creating jobs at a level.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Sorry, that was me. We are creating jobs at a level that's not commensurate with the housing we're creating. And that is exacerbating a shortage that we're seeing in our community. Every year between 2010 and 2020, the region added the equivalent of the city of Pickerington every single year. We need to be able to make sure we have housing for those folks as they come into our community so that they have access to affordable housing and our existing residents also have access and continued access to affordability. Now, once we look at the supply in the kind of broader sense of making sure that we have enough housing to support our community, that's a really important foundation. But there are a few things that the market itself is not going to naturally bring to our neighbors. And one is just the preservation of our existing affordability. We're going to be looking at programs over the coming years at how we can, as a city, engage with our existing affordability, both assisted and unassisted residential, to make sure that we can lock that down for our residents that are in the community. This also goes to the important work that Councilmember Favor has done around housing for all legislation and the tenant protections that she has put in place and continues to work on behalf of our residents. We're going to invest in affordable housing. So this is where we are looking at units for those families and individuals that earn below 80% of our area median income. And that is a level to which we are not able to see market rate construction deliver those units. We are really, we need to invest as a city to bring those units into the community. In 2019, the City of Columbus voters approved a $50 million housing bond, of which we've committed that $50 million to support projects that are coming in under that kind of big A affordability. We ended up producing about 1,300 new units of units below the 80% area median income level with that $50 million bond package. The mayor has announced we will be moving forward in November at asking the voters to consider another affordable housing bond. And this time we are going to be floating $150 million for affordable housing. So again, really needing to invest specifically in bringing that affordability into our community. And finally, we need to make sure that we are including all of our residents in these, the prosperity that our region is experiencing. And one of the things about affordability is we also need to make sure that folks can afford units that fit their family. The units are safe and stable, and neighbors and units are in neighborhoods that of the family's choice, right? That there is access to the market for our families across the city and the region, so that there is equitable and economic diversity around the city. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the CRA policy specifically this evening, but that really, this policy really leans into specifically the component of including, right? And our opportunity that came about in 2018 to really include below market rents in these higher rent neighborhoods so that we could have access to those communities for all of our families. So when I talk about the housing shortage, again, we are vastly underbuilding based on our job creation. So where as a region, this is not the city of Columbus, this is as a region in central Ohio, we are building about one house for every 2.5 jobs we produce. As we look across the communities that we call our peer cities, in order to sustain that affordability, to maintain affordable housing in their community, they really need to be closer to 1.5 to 1, so that it does not continue to exacerbate the scarcity that then leads to the lack of affordability. It leads directly to where we see rents increasing and you see home prices increasing. So we have an opportunity to really lean in to make sure that we are building the housing infrastructure we need to support our growing population. Another issue facing our community right now is that we are individuals and families that are being priced out of some neighborhoods. Again, when we look kind of globally at the supply issue, that is certainly an important foundation, but it does not address well the disparities in some of our neighborhoods and the lack of opportunity that some of our families have. And as we continue to see prices rise, and certainly some of these opportunity neighborhoods, we want to make sure that there are opportunities there for our individuals and families. I think the other issue we're facing, which again goes back to the invest conversation I mentioned earlier, is that increasingly expensive to build affordable housing. We're going to talk a little bit about tonight about the cost of construction, where it's going and where we have seen some of the changes even in the last couple of years, and certainly even in the last year around construction costs, labor costs, even interest rates are part of that impact that we're seeing more recently. And where we look at that, where we talked a little bit about the city needing to invest in that affordable housing that's available for those below 80% of the area median income. One of the tools that our partners use that bring those units into the community is the residential tax abatement. So given all of that, when we look specifically at the CRA and the community or the residential tax incentive, what we're really looking at is 3 goals that we are looking to achieve with the program. So we are looking to incentivize residential construction, again, back to the fact that we are not building enough housing. We are not keeping pace with our job growth and therefore our population growth. And as we exacerbate that scarcity, that's where we see rents and house prices going up and pricing out our existing community members and making it challenging for our new neighbors to find housing. We want to make sure that this program, ever since 2018 and the work that was done then, was able to include below market rate units in higher rent neighborhoods. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about the value of the abatement and where we are today in terms of the need for the abatement. But the opportunity starting in 2018 to really capture some of those below market rate units in those neighborhoods where we're seeing rents rise. And then finally, again, just supporting the development of the affordable housing through the city. Again, this is a tool that is utilized by our affordable housing partners, and it's an important part of how they can bring a project into the community. And so I always want to talk a little bit about affordability in Central Ohio. And when we talk about affordable housing, it's a word that I think has a lot of different meanings for a lot of different folks in the community. And I think when we talk about making sure that our residents can afford housing, we want to make sure that there are opportunities, again, for safe and stable housing throughout the community, for families to pay no more than 30% of their income on their housing. That is mortgage or rent plus utilities. That is a level to which we see a lot of opportunity for our families to also be able to meet other needs for their family. including childcare, transportation, but also saving and ultimately ending up in a place where you can get into home ownership if you're not quite there. So when we really talk about that 30%, when we talk about some of the folks that are working in our community, it's important to understand where we are on that spectrum. And these are annual mean wages for Central Ohio. So these are some just typical examples of folks working in our community, what they're earning per year, and then what their housing expenses would look like if they could stay below the 30% of their income. And so, again, the residential tax incentive originally was really fundamentally meant to facilitate the construction of residential, right? There is a cost to construction. You can see on the left some of those examples: land costs, the construction costs. We also have financing, costs that come along with that, and operating expenses. And as they're building, considering the development of a project, it has to be that the revenue exceeds the costs, right? That there needs to be a return, or that development's not going to happen. And again, going back to the fact that we need housing for folks coming into our community, this is a really important challenge that our development community was facing in some of our neighborhoods. And so you had a gap, right? That we just didn't have the rents where we needed them to be in order to encourage private sector developers to build in our communities. So the tax abatement fills that gap, and it allows us to temporarily abate the taxes on a project so that those numbers do, as our development partners will say, pencil out, so that they are able to bring these new residential buildings into our community. And the tax abatement itself, so there's a pre-development tax value on any of the parcels that would take advantage of the abatement. That pre-development taxable value remains on the books during the period of the abatement. So the abatement does not abate the entirety of that tax burden. It only abates the tax burden associated with the new development, with the improvements that are made to the property. They will not have to pay taxes on those improvements for the period of the first 15 years, as long as they are in compliance with some of the requirements we'll lay out later on. Years 15 plus, the entire taxable value remains on the books. So it is a temporary abatement of just the improved value. And again, as we saw from the slide before, if we do not provide that abatement as part of that incentive to develop residential, we would not see that residential come online. And so therefore we would not have that improved value on the tax roll without the benefit of that incentive. So it is a temporary abatement, really facilitated a permanent taxable value that will remain on the books along with the units that are created that are important for the community. So again, as I mentioned, prior to 2018, what we really had was a pretty straightforward tool where you receive the abatement for the construction of residential. In the city of Columbus, we have identified specific CRA areas. It does not cover the entire city. There are specific CRAs that have been legislated. And so prior to 2018, they all had the same criteria, and that was just the construction of residential, that you would be able to secure that abatement. As we started to see neighborhoods changing, as we started to see markets changing, there was definite interest in understanding what the value of that abatement was and whether or not the city was capturing all of the public value needed off of that abatement investment that we were making. And so there was a pretty big effort in 2018 to understand what the value of that was and what types of public value we could capitalize on out of that particular tool. And what ended up as the result was the categorization of each of our CRA areas based on a series of distress criteria, and whether or not, which reflected a lot of where they were in terms of rents on the revenue side, and then where we were on cost of construction. And so you ended up with 3 categories, the highest category being market ready. And these were neighborhoods where we did see an opportunity to capture some below market rent rates based on the value of the abatement versus the cost of construction. Ready for revitalization would be our middle category. Again, still some opportunity there, a little less value in the incentive, needing to right size that for the ready for revitalization areas. And then the third area would be ready for opportunity. And in the 2018 policy, there was did not find the opportunity to add that affordability requirement into the ready for opportunity. Since 2018, We are looking at some of the outcomes, and again, thinking back to the goals of the project, right? We want to incentivize residential construction. So this is the units that were built in the abatement areas, utilizing the abatement. It was 3,875 units that we were able to bring into the community with the use of this tool. We are also able to require that 191 below market units were included in projects across those neighborhoods. In 2018, the policy was adopted and there was a transition timeline. So we actually see a lot more generation happening now that the policy is in full effect. And then the third piece, again, going back to it, is a tool that our affordable housing partners use, and it's a really key one. And it was able to bring 533 big A affordable units below that 80% area median income into the community. So in 2018, City Council put a part of the policy was a requirement that we review the policy every 3 years. And so a lot of you joined us last year in 21 when we started this process and really wanted to take a look at the policy and make sure it was meeting the goals that we had set forward. So the two primary questions that the Department of Development asked is whether or not the residential markets had changed. It's since 2018 to 2021, and really understanding where those construction costs, land costs were, but also what were our developers seeing in the side of revenue. And then we were going to look at how did it perform, right? You just saw some of those numbers in terms of, again, meeting those goals. Was it able to incentivize residential? Were we able to bring below market rents into the communities? And then were we able to facilitate the affordable housing projects that we need? And so based on that, we asked Vote Strategic Insights, which is an economic consultant, to come in and really look at the markets and look at where we were in terms of cost of construction and then where we were on the revenue side. So we asked them to do a gap analysis, right? What was the gap between those things? Where we saw the slide earlier had identified the gap. We needed to understand, again, how much we were needed to subsidize that gap, and then how much then was excess value that we could capture the other policy priorities we have around these below market rate rents. So we looked at a cash on cash return, really, again, where were we in terms of land costs? Where was the labor market? How much does lumber cost? What is it costing our development partners to bring projects out of the ground? And then comparing that with where we were seeing the rents, right? Where had rents come between 2018 and 21 on the revenue side? So again, how much did we need to continue to subsidize the project just from a feasibility standpoint? And then how much could we capture additional public policy priorities? We had Vote look at 4 different neighborhoods: Short North, Near East, Hilltop, and Linden. And we were able to take that information and really identify a way in which we had an ability to go deeper and wider on the affordability. So what we had that proposal when the development department was able to look through that information really from the spring and into the fall, and then working with an internal working group here at the City of Columbus, crafted a proposed policy update, which we were able to start sharing in November of last year. And again, I think a number of you probably attended some of these meetings with us between November and January. And we collected a lot of feedback. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is based on that feedback, some of the amendments we've made to the policy, and then we can talk through where those are. And so what you see here is kind of the 3 different iterations of where we are with the policy. So these are your market ready areas. Again, the 2018 policy, which is in place currently, has an affordability requirement of 10% of the units be at 80% area median income, 10% at 100% of the area median income. What we looked at in last year and what we shared with folks in the community was that we were able to capture, based on that gap analysis, either a deeper or wider affordability. So we extended that criteria to either the development needs to include 10% of the units at 60% AMI or 10% at 80 and 10% at 80, sorry, or they need to do 30% of the units at 80% AMI. So again, you have a deeper affordability requirement by asking the developers to go down to the 60% area median income, or a wider capturing 80% area median income, but 30% of the units. We're getting more units on that proposed policy that we proposed in 21. We also removed the ability for the abatement to apply without an affordability requirement on single family new construction and renovation. So that was a change from 2018. We removed the 5-story height requirement. It created a number of challenges with our neighborhood plan documents that communities had worked on, where it might not fit with the plan to have a 5-story building. And so we really felt like there were other places within the city where that density and height requirements lived, and that it really wasn't appropriate to live in the CRA policy because it was causing some conflicts with our neighborhood plans. And in 21, we did not include a fee in lieu option. That is, you see in yellow, that is the change we've made in Market Ready from the last conversation. It is really important as we craft something that will be part of our code that we allow for some ability to provide relief for a project that may not be able to include the units. We certainly aren't able to forecast all of the different types of developments that will come under this program, and that could again meet the goals of the program, but might not be able to, for a variety of reasons, incorporate the units within the development. We did see a little bit of that under the current policy. Projects, either they were a particular size or a variety of other reasons where we had folks that were taking advantage of the fee in lieu. And again, when we are working with code and there is not that built-in flexibility, it can create unintended consequences. So it was an important part that we wanted to fold back in to give that relief in case a project wasn't able to accommodate the units. I'm going to talk a little bit about the math and how we got to 32,000 in a minute. And then one of the other additions we had from the 2018 policy was requiring the commensurate distribution of units that were affordable, equivalent to what we saw on their market rate side. So the 2018 policy was silent on that. We have added that into this policy. Ready for revitalization, very similar. We were able to capture deeper or wider. We were able to require that our partners that utilize the abatement bring in these units 60%, 10% of the units at 60% and 10% at 80, or 30% of the units at 80% AMI. We also required the affordability, again, on the single family new construction and renovation. And again, in this particular CRA category, we have added back in the fee in lieu option. That for ready for revitalization is 16,000. And then again, we require that commensurate distribution of units in the building that the policy was silent on in 2018. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the math for the fee in lieu. We looked back again at the vote gap analysis, and one of the things that they provided to us in that work was that they had identified what the median market rents were for these CRA areas. And without the inclusion of the affordability, we're at $1,800 a month on the market ready areas. When we include the 10% of the units at 60% and 10% at 80%, it drops the aggregate median rent on that project from $1,800 to $1,670. So again, these are aggregate rents across unit types, really meant to be kind of indicative of what that gap is, which was the purpose of the analysis. And that delta in market ready was about $130 a month. When we take that across the entirety of the first year, it ends up being $1,560. And then we took that and escalated that value 4.5% each year for the 15-year term, which gets us to the 32,000. We really wanted to understand what value we were asking the development partners to put in to include that affordability and make sure that the fee in lieu was commensurate with the value that we were asking them to put in when they added the units. Same for ready for revitalization, but there is a little smaller gap because the rents are just not as high in those particular CRA areas. And so we end up going down to 16,000 a unit for the fee in lieu there. And moving on to our final area, the third category, ready for opportunity areas. You'll see in 2018 and originally in our proposal for 21, we did not include the affordability requirement. As we had conversations in the community, there is a deep understanding of how fast our markets are changing in Columbus and the need for us to be proactively responsive, right? When we did the gap analysis, we did not see a gap between where the market rents were in the ready for opportunity areas and what was naturally occurring at 80 and 100%, right? We are seeing units renting for equivalent in those brackets, the 80 and 100%. So while they're naturally occurring today, it was very important, again, for that proactive component of it, and to make sure that we were prepared for change. If those markets change and we see those rents escalate out of the 80 and 100% levels, then they will be required to be incorporated in order to maintain that 15-year abatement. So that is one that will help us also keep an eye on those neighborhoods and identify when we are seeing changes in those communities. Again, as we looked at the math that I applied for market ready and ready for revitalization, when we looked at ready for opportunity, again, that delta is really zero because the rents are naturally occurring at the 80 and 100%. And so we looked back at the 2018 policy in the ready for revitalization category. We required those 10% of the units at 80 and 10% at 100. And we had a $5,000 fee in lieu option that we provided. So we utilize that same value here in ready for opportunity. And again, we also added back in the requirement that the units are distributed equally to the market. So those are the big changes we've made in the policy in terms of the kind of evolution from what we presented in the fall and winter of last year and then where we are today. I think you guys have probably seen this cadence of public meetings that we'll be having. Tonight's meeting is a virtual community meeting. Wanted to be sure that we provided a number of platforms for folks to join us. Councilmember Favor will be holding a council hearing next week at 5:30 p.m. in council chambers. And then finally, we're gonna have an in-person community meeting on June 21st at 5:30 p.m. We are still working to confirm the location for that meeting. We do have email addresses for all the folks that are joining us this evening, and we have maintained an email distribution list related to the CRA in particular. So we will share that information out as soon as we can confirm that location. So that's where we are on next steps. I'm going to move to the last slide. This is really, I want to move into the questions and discussion component of the meeting because I think that'll be a really important part of our conversation. But I did want to go ahead and put up, I believe a lot of you probably do have my contact information, but if you do not, it is available here. And then certainly, there's folks in the Department of Development that can get you my contact information as well. But I just wanted to make sure I put this up for a minute so that you guys had access to that. So I am going to currently stop sharing just so we can open up for the conversation. I can always go back to slides if we need to. I'm going to ask that Miss Hannah Reed really facilitate and moderate the conversation of any questions or discussion that those of you in attendance would like to have on the CRA policy as I presented it this evening.
All right. With that, thank you, Erin. We're going to do it. I think a lot of you had joined us for our last virtual meeting in January. So we're going to do it the same way. You should all have a raise hand function on your screen. And if you raise your hand, we'll call on you in the order that I'll get a list of the order that hands are raised, and I'll just go through the list and call on each of the raised hands. If you have a question that you do not either want to ask out loud or are having issues with your mic, you have a Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen. You can type in a question that would go to the whole group as well, and I can help pepper those into the raised hand questions. We will ask that once you have asked your question, if you could please lower your hand. And then if you have another question, feel free to re-raise it. We just want to make sure that we give everybody the opportunity to ask a question and raise their hand, and make sure that we've got an accurate list over here on the side. So I see with that, one question from Mr. Joe Motil. He's first up. And Mr. Motil, you are unmuted. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, and thank you, Erin, for the presentation. That was great. I still have issues with the one-time payment, of course, and I just want to reiterate the importance of the 60% AMI. And I see where you guys have changed the 30% of units as an exception to the 10% at 60 and 10% at 80 to 30% at 80. And I think it's really, really important to maintain the 60% AMI, and I'm just making a suggestion that perhaps it should be 15% 60% AMI and 15% 80% AMI a change, which would, again, would add up to the 30% of units. Because, and the other reason is the average black income level in the city of Columbus is $35,220. And, you know, that AMI level is pretty much close to that. So that's just a comment. And I also wanted to ask the question, you said, you know, you did mention the abatements were temporary. And have any tax abated parcels that have expired been renewed? Could anybody perhaps answer that question? And how many people actually, if you could maybe give me a close number, who used the buyout in this last 3 years? Thanks.
Sure. Oh, thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. And I'm going to lean a little bit on our housing division folks. Jeremy, can you talk about who has utilized the buyout so far?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Druitt. I'm the program manager for the CRA Tax Abatement Program. So in terms of who utilized the buyout, we did see a fair amount of developers utilize that option, particularly in the ready for revitalization category. To provide very rough numbers, the majority of developers would provide the units as agreed upon. Maybe about 1/3 to 40% or so might have gone for the buyout. And there are other options too, such as environmental remediation that are also eligible to include in lieu of an affordable unit.
And how about the any tax abated parcels have expired, have been renewed?
To my knowledge, no. And the reason for that is how one gets improvements to be eligible in the first place. What happens is, take, for example, a single family homeowner doing renovations to their home, maybe a new roof, new siding and the like. Those specific improvements and that specific value is what is considered in the abatement. So let's say 15 years ago, someone did that work, 15 years go by, and the abatement falls off. They can't just reapply for an abatement for the exact same set of work that they already did. Now, they can apply again if they do brand new work, but we don't renew abatements in the way that was described.
Yeah, I guess specifically I was kind of looking like at Park's Edge and some of these condominiums on Spring Street and such. Because I saw, and I'm not sure, but somebody had informed me that they had expired and they were renewed. And that's hearsay.
And I think, Jeremy, you would have to qualify for a new abatement under new work.
Right.
There would not be a renewal option on the same work or the same new construction.
Okay.
Right. And another implication of that is when you do, let's say you were a condominium owner, you did work 15 years ago, you want to do brand new work today. That brand new work today would fall under the current affordability requirements of the policy because of the nature of when that work occurred. So it's not as if one can renew an abatement pre-affordability requirements and get it renewed. They can apply again for brand new work, but then they are subject to these rules you've had in place since 2018.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right, I see Joe has lowered his hand, so I'm going to assume that means that the question is complete. I do not see any other hands raised or questions in the comments. Oh, but here's Ben. Okay, Miss Betty Janes, I see your hand now. I'm going to unmute you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Erin, for a great presentation. Jeremy, I do have a couple questions because I didn't quite understand what you were saying on how many units. When we last talked, there were 2 projects that utilized the buyout, but how many units did that include and in which CRAs? If you have that information.
I think, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, we could probably get an accounting of that and provide that out to the group. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
That way, yeah, Betty, we can get you the accurate numbers and the location so you're aware. I think When we had spoken in 21, there have been more that have occurred since our meetings. So we
Okay.
can get an accurate accounting to date and provide that out to the group.
Because I'm not opposed to the entire policy, but the fee in lieu of was very, the community was very adamant about that. And so you indicated that there would be a way to limit it, and I guess I need to know, I have quite several questions about this. The why, you explained that and you explained how it works, but how do we limit it? And why, if the goal is to create mixed income neighborhoods with economic diversity, why would we be allowing a developer to not build the affordable units in order to reach those mixed income goals?
And you are correct, that mixed income goal is one that is the priority. When we have things written in code without an opportunity for flexibility based on particular parts about a project, it is likely going to create unintended consequences for us. And it's challenging with code because it is so prescriptive that without that relief valve, we would foresee we would have some challenges. And what we did was then increase the fee in lieu by quite a bit so that we could make sure that it is an option that is not utilized often. And that was really the making sure that we had an opportunity to address projects that may not be able to put them in the code, and have that part of it, but also make sure it was of a dollar amount that would make it less likely to be utilized.
Are those fees, does that go to the Affordable Housing Trust? And then are those affordable units built within the same CRA?
So
Or,
that's a great question, Betty. And I think that was one of the takeaways from the policy in 2018. The fee in lieu had an option to go to a local community development corporation or to the Affordable Housing Trust. What we have looked at since that policy and kind of the outcomes of that is, we really need the opportunity to address some of the issues that we're seeing in the CRA areas with a little bit more flexibility. And so that money will be coming back into the city of Columbus to be utilized for programs to support that economic diversity of those CRA neighborhoods.
so those affordable housing developers who built 74% of the affordable housing units as part of this policy, so that money will be given to those developers who are, because they've got OFA and LIHTC grants, they're a little bit, they have a better opportunity to build that. Would those fees then go to those types of developers?
We have, as we look to November with the bond package that the mayor is going to propose before the voters, that bond funding really gives us funding that fits really well with those projects on the LIHTC side. Because of the constraints of bond funding, that is an opportunity where we can utilize those funds. When we look at some of the changes that we think are going to be coming in the years ahead, where we don't believe that the emergency rental assistance that's currently being provided by the federal government, we don't believe that will continue. And so the opportunity to really look at housing stability in some of these neighborhoods related to some of the flexibility that these funds will have that some of our other funding streams don't have. But we do have ways in which we can support those projects. So really looking at other needs for families and residents in these neighborhoods and make sure we can support them as well.
All right. I will say I'm going to need to see this again because I don't quite understand the why in the fee in lieu of, because that was such a contentious point with the community at all the hearings that I attended. I'm going to have to look at these numbers a little bit better. Will you be sending out this presentation?
Yes, we will be sending out, and we will also be putting it up on our website on the Department of Development. So anybody can send a link around and you guys can take a look at it. And then, of course, Betty, like I said, you see my contact information. I think you have everything. Please reach out if you have any additional questions.
Okay, and if I can, one last question. Why 15 years? When we think about 15 years, and I understand that the base taxes will remain, but it's only the improvements that are abated. the response is always, well, the schools are eventually going to get this money, but we have graduated an entire class plus who did not benefit from those increased taxes. And, I know at one point, the ready for, or the market ready initially was 10 years and it was glide pathed out, starting at 10 years. 15 years seems, we're looking at schools that don't have air conditioning, that are really struggling with deferred maintenance. This is hard, and I know that the school, Columbus City Schools is putting on a ballot initiative, and I would have a hard time voting for that, knowing that they are, I don't know if they're, if I can say allowed, because I don't think they can say no to these. But money's being left on the table and that the schools so desperately need.
I think the challenge with this program is, as we look at the data, we still need to incentivize residential development in these neighborhoods. There still needs to be that gap subsidy provided to encourage our development community to do the construction. And I think, Betty, I've sent you the data that we got from Vote around cost of construction versus where we are on revenues right now. That gap is really, truly there, even in neighborhoods like the Short North. Cost of construction continues to rise, and we have got to build those units in our community. That is a really important public policy goal that we have. And the developments will not occur save for that abatement because the numbers just don't work. And so that value, while it is, you have to forego it for the first 15 years, without that abatement, we would not see that new improvement and the value would not be there for the schools to capture. So when you look at the spreadsheet documents that we have, where we are in the city of Columbus, we are in this very challenging spot for us right now, in the sense that, yes, we absolutely are facing a housing crisis, but our rents are not elevated to the point of not needing the subsidy on the residential construction. Where we have especially the need for density and the need to bring really more expensive projects out of the ground so we can get an elevated number of units. We looked at the data again in 21. We will look at it again in 23 years from now, in 2025, where we will be looking to see where we are in terms of the ability to reduce the value of that abatement through reduced time or capture additional affordability. Right. And that'll be the conversation we can have. But the value of the abatement as a subsidy is still part of what we need to facilitate, again, addressing the scarcity of housing in our community, and then making sure that there is that value post year 15, that the improvement has occurred and that taxable value does lay them with the schools as well. So this is the challenge that we have. And I think we've all talked about the need to kind of right size this policy, because there are all three goals that we want to meet, right? We still need the policy to incent residential construction. We also are able to capture those affordable units. And then we also need to use it as a tool for our affordable housing partners to bring units below 80% into the marketplace.
All right, Miss Betty, any other questions? If at this moment, feel free to put your hand down, and then if, as we're talking, something else comes up, put it back up and we'll give you a call. Next up is Mr. Jim Lipnos. You
Hi,
are unmuted and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Aaron, I appreciate your time. Could you explain just really quickly the AMI, how that's calculated, how often it's updated, in the area that it covers? Because I believe it's a regional, not city-wide. Like regionally, I mean bigger than just the city of Columbus.
Yes, and I'm going to lean in to our folks in the housing division as well. They can correct me if I misspeak on this one, but it is provided by HUD. And they are, it is the regional area median income for our community. Jeremy, I saw your camera come back on. Am I correct in saying that?
Right. It's for the Columbus metro area. And in terms of how often it's updated, the 2022 numbers actually just came out pretty recently. They're updated on an annual basis.
Okay, so it's updated yearly. Okay.
Yep.
That's all. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Looks like Joe Motil, you are up again. You are unmuted and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I just kind of want to reiterate something that Betty said, and I think it's really important to be transparent about the number of units that were bought out. And I think it's important for the city to provide the public for that. I'm sure you probably don't want to do it, and I understand that. But I think it's very important that you be transparent about that number so that the public can see that.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's not a problem at all, Joe. We'll get our team to do that, pull those numbers out, and we'll provide that out to the group as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
No problem.
That's all I have.
And are there other folks who
I
have?
was muted myself.
Oh.
But, Mr. Steve Campbell, you are up next and you are unmuted. The floor is yours.
So, good evening, and thank you for having this hearing this evening. In your discussion about housing scarcity, did your numbers reflect any analysis of the pace of multifamily development versus the pace of single-family housing development? And in your numbers that showed about 3,875 units that received an abatement in the program, do you have a breakdown of how many of those were multifamily rental and multifamily for sale, or single family rental and single family for sale?
We could certainly get that number for you. We didn't break it down for this particular presentation, but I'm happy to pull those numbers as well and provide them back.
Okay. Do you know, in your kind of global discussion about scarcity, is there a greater need for multifamily versus single family, or I'm just trying to get a sense of what your analysis showed?
Yeah, and the analysis is really based on the region, and quite honestly, we're not building enough. We're not building what we need, and we're not building where we need it. Right. And so there is a need for all different housing types to come into the community to accommodate the folks that are coming into the community. I think where we see some differences between across the region is we will see different amounts of multifamily that are built in different communities. And certainly we see multifamily development happen in the city of Columbus, where we may not see as much happen with some of our suburban partners. I do have some breakdowns between both the city of Columbus and our suburban partners in terms of the construction kind of in the last economic cycle between 2009 and 2019. But those are, really looking globally at the scarcity issue. It is all units of all kinds everywhere.
Thank you.
All right. I do not see any additional questions in the question box or hands raised. So I will do a last call for folks. If there's any other remaining questions, comments that you would like to share, go ahead and raise your hand or type it into the question box. And if there aren't any, we'll turn it over to Erin to close out the meeting and presentation.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. And again, as I mentioned, please feel free to pass my contact information along to partners that may not have been able to join us this evening. If folks have questions, they can reach out directly and we will get a hold of the information for you. We will have, again, a meeting next week that Councilmember Faber will host at Council Chambers. And then we will be hosting an in-person meeting with the Department of Development, again, a little more like this with a conversation and discussion component on the 21st. The council hearing next week on the 15th. You'll have to double check with Councilmember Faber's office, but I believe a speaker slip will need to be submitted that day.
That is correct.
Is it by noon, Hannah?
It's either by noon or 3 o'clock, but
Okay.
I would double check with her office, and her office team is Anissa Liban. It's AALIBAN at columbus.gov.
Perfect. So that'll be the council hearing, which again will require speaker slips, and then we'll be back on the 21st for development department conversation Location to be determined. I think we are getting close at confirming that, so we should be able to send that out shortly. And then again, if anybody wants to reach out to me, please shoot me an email or give me a call. I look forward to, again, continuing this conversation with everyone and getting the policy updated to capture some more of that affordability. So we are looking forward to that opportunity and appreciate everyone's time this evening and continued participation in this really important policy. And Hannah, I don't believe we had any other comments or questions at this
I
time.
don't
So
see,
will-
nope, I don't see any additional comments or questions. So with that, we will go ahead and, oh, I do have one question.
Okay.
Please try to post and provide the data and information prior to the city council hearing next week. Yes, as Erin mentioned, we will both follow up because we have the email list from this meeting with the presentation that she shared this evening and also the payment in lieu of question that I know came up several times from some of the attendees. We will get that email out to folks, but also in addition, the presentation will be posted on the development's webpage as well. So you'll have the same information prior to next week's meeting.
All right. Well, Hannah, I appreciate you hosting this evening. And again, appreciate everyone attending. And I will let everyone go back and have the rest of their Tuesday evening. Appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.